Hey, thanks everyone for joining today. Our webinar on lessons learned from the global conflict. My name is Stephen Marshowitz, Director of Program Development here at TrustedSec, and we have a great discussion for you today. It's a fantastic day to learn something new, so we'll dive in and let you know what we're seeing, how it's changing the landscape, and apply it to both what your organization needs and what the prevalent trends are in the industry today. First, a little bit about TrustedSec. First a few housekeeping items. The webinar is going to be recorded, so you'll be able to go back and review it and follow up email on your YouTube page or on the links on the TrustedSec website under events. We definitely encourage you to ask questions, and we in the Q&A, but you can also go in the comments if you need, and we'll make sure that we get to them either during or at the end. Now, first, quick background on TrustedSec. The key to it really is the people, and you'll definitely get a glimpse of that today. Our goal is to help you build, test, and fix your program and respond to any incidents that you might have. We share knowledge across 90+ consultants now, the experiences from over 1,000 assessments that we do in a year, the research of the latest threats, creating new exploits and tools, and we always have a keen focus on customizing technical and advisory assessments to your particular needs. A few services to highlight. We have several different types of assessments and support, depending on where you need assistance. Today, I'll focus a little bit on our hardening reviews, M365, Azure, Active Directory, and even DevSecOps hardening. Incredibly popular and an important first step. We also do adversarial detection and countermeasures. It's more than a purple team, where our team works with yours on both offensive and defensive aspects. And then the incident response readiness assessment. And that really gets into the nitty-gritty, the specific steps of how you respond when something bad happens. It really gets into the tactics and technical aspects of it. Great service. Okay, with that, I'm happy to introduce our speakers today. We have 3 perspectives coming from our targeted research, incident response, and detection engineering teams. Carlos Perez, Stephen Irwin, and Leo Bastidas. Carlos, would you start us off giving us a little bit of background about yourself?
Yes, so as Steve mentioned, my name is Carlos Perez. I have over 2 decades of experience working in InfoSec, both from building out networks, securing networks, both blue, red. Currently work as a team lead for the research team, where we develop offensive tooling and defensive tooling for our consulting practices, with the main focus on building out all the different frameworks and payload generators for our red team. In addition to that, a lot of our work is actually based on some threat intel research that we do to make sure that we provide the best emulation for our customers.
Steve?
Yep, my name is Stephen Irwin, and I'm part of our incident response team. So, we're handling coming in after incidences, doing tabletop discussions, things of that nature. I've been doing that for about 10 years. Previous to that, I done networking and security with utility slash IoT slash OT background. So, some of the stuff that we'll be discussing in here is pretty pertinent to that. So that sums up my background.
Excellent. Leo?
Hey, how's it going, everybody? Leo Bastidas. I'm on the detection engineering team, focusing on research and engineering. Before that, I was on the IR team with Steve and TrustedSec, but before that, I come from the DoD, and I focus on blue team, defender, CPT teams, threat hunting, and I finished out my career in the military in psychological operations.
Excellent. Okay, Carlos, let's start off with some of the basics today and tell us a little bit about who we're talking about here.
Yeah, so we have several main actors. We have APT-29, which is the Russian SRV, which is their foreign intelligence branch. We have APT-28 and SAMWORM. Both of them are part of the GRU, which is the military branch of the Russian intelligence part. Their main focus is on gathering intelligence, and in the case of the Sandworm group, it's one of those very unique examples where most of their attacks have been against SCADA and ICS infrastructure, specifically around the Ukrainian power grid. We have teams like Armageddon, Dragonfly, which are FSB, which used to be the KGB. Main focus is on intelligence gathering, in addition to some other operations like distributing wipers, simulating ransomware. We have also UNC 1151, which is believed to be the special service from Belarus. This is one of the new APT actors that we're starting to see out there, and a lot of the information that we're getting right now is from the Ukrainian CERT team, in addition to a very few vendors out there. We also have, for the first time in kind of like an armed conflict, we have multiple hacktivist groups. Among them, we have Agent Tesla, X-Loader, we have Invisimal, which is our Russian cybercrime group. We also have UNC 2589, and in addition to that, some other ransomware crews have also been active doing attacks against Ukraine, mostly as part of their patriotic duty, you may say.
Yeah, and I believe there's also the hacktivists on the Ukraine side as well, right, Carlos? There's a IT
Yes.
Army. IT Army's big. You probably see them recruiting all over the place in Slack and Discord. They were crowdsourcing help from all the different hacker groups and all the different communities. So that's pretty crazy. That's the first time I ever seen that in my 15 years in the DoD. I'm not like a cyber war expert, but I've been around the community for a long time, and that's the first time I seen that. And then, Belarus has the cyber partisans, I believe, that
Yes.
hacked the train system in Belarus and shut that down because Belarus was shipping equipment, shipping troops through train to Russia, right, or something to
Yes.
that effect. And Belarus cyber partisans, or I believe they're called cyber partisans, and they just pretty much shut them down.
And they have been a thorn on the FSB side
yeah.
for a very long time. One of the things that they did is that they actually hacked the passport system of Belarus, gather all of that data, parse it for the press and everybody out there. So they got very well in terms of their constant releases to kind of like milk the news cycles out there from the different news providers around the world. And one of the things that they did is that they found that the FSB was actually using sequential passport numbers, which actually burned some of their agents in some NATO countries also.
Yeah, and that's crazy. And I think they came out, they have like a spokesperson, and they actually came out like, we're not hackers. We had to learn everything on the fly through YouTube tutorials, just like us, right? We're learning through YouTube tutorials, blogs, and they learned everything on the fly. And they gave credit where credit's due. They said the Belarus cyber security program is not that advanced. So it was pretty easy for them. Even as newbies and learning on the fly, they were still able to do that grave effect to their system and supply chain. That's pretty crazy.
Oh, yeah.
So tell us a little bit, Carlos, on what happened since those first attacks. We've heard about the electrical grid, even there was a large steel plant. Those made big news. What's been the timeline sort of leading up to the war, and what things have we, traditionally seen?
Yeah, so you can say that Georgia and Ukraine have been kind of like the testing ground for Russia in terms of cyber operations. Specifically in the case of Ukraine, they actually started in 2014 with several denial of service attacks during the elections, and also several influence campaigns to kind of like delegitimize the election in the eyes of the Ukrainians as they were starting out. Then we see in 2016, we start seeing for the first time very well planned, coordinated attacks against the power grid. This is specifically from Sandworm. And one of the things that we're actually seeing from that group is that the level of expertise to perform those attacks required quite a lab, several experts, access to hardware to test those types of attacks, because they would go inside of the software that controls the controllers, the PLCs. They will then target those PLCs, and then they would do coordinated attacks. This is where we actually started looking at and going like, you know what, their cyber operations are very well planned. They're maturing to a very good level where they have very good coordination, because in their attacks, they would just start switching the different breakers for these electrical connections. And at the same time, they would do denial of service attacks against the phone bridges for people when they called in to report the problems. In addition to that, they start just shutting down all types of systems. Then we see kind of like one of the biggest destructive attacks, which is NotPetya, that happened in 2017. This is one of those attacks where their payload was wormable and started spreading very, very, very quickly inside of Ukraine. This is one of those textbooks examples that we keep looking at of what can happen into an integrated system, a coordinated attack against a country that is performed to actually destroy all of that infrastructure. So NotPetya was that example. It even spread outside of Ukraine, hitting shipping lanes, hitting companies in the US, companies in Europe, and other places. Also, we saw the attempt of a chlorine distillation system. In that attempt, that was a very dangerous one, because that one would have actually cost quite a bit of lives if the chemicals that were in that distillation system were actually made to go out of that facility into the surrounding population. And then when we look right now at what has been happening throughout this year, has been a very, very, very fluid series of attacks. We've seen them from the moment right before the invasion, where some of our teams from Cyber Command, both Navy and Marine Corps, were actually over there at Ukraine, helping the Ukrainians do threat hunting inside of their electrical grid and other critical infrastructure at the moment that the missiles started coming in. We're helping with that, and we start looking at some of the attacks. They got hit by many wiper attacks. Some of them pose as ransomware. In addition to that, we saw a bunch of web page defacements to kind of like impact the morale of the Ukrainian people as they were going to the different websites of government entities. And then we have been seeing throughout that year kind of like a small shift more to intelligence gathering. So from our side as a consulting company, we've been looking at all of these types of attacks. How are they being performed? What tools are they using? What techniques? And what is being normalized as acceptable type of behavior in these types of scenarios?
Yeah, and with that, Carlos, you kind of hit it, looking even back as late as 2016 with the power grid attacks, the Russians were actually making duplicate infrastructure of what the Ukrainian substations, and matching equipment, one-to-one, software one-to-one, and that's how they developed, that's how they started developing these attacks. So it was very, very successful. It was, a lot of damage was mitigated, thankfully, due to some human interaction. Some of the operators saw what was going on and started pulling some plugs because it didn't match what should have been going on. But the level of sophistication has just been kind of ramping up exponentially, even as early as 2016. You talk about NotPetya in 2017, that as you said became a global kind of attack. I think it's as of now one of the highest kind of damaging malware that has gone through, causing multiple billions of dollars across all sorts of manufacturing, shipping, anybody and everybody kind of had was unfortunately a target of that one. So the level of sophistication in the attack vectors that are being used is something that I would say is the first time I'm seeing kind of people out there duplicating one-to-one control systems and testing it that way, and then kind of letting it go into the wild. So yeah, it's interesting on that front, on how advanced they're getting with that.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but Russia's been doing this. Like the first documented cyber attack in a conflict was like 2007, right? Versus Estonia, and then 2008 again versus Georgia, right? But Russia's been doing this, I believe, documented since what, like 96 with Trula or something like that. Since 1996, so they've been doing this for a long, long time.
And they keep pushing that envelope. Like,
it's pretty crazy from that aspect. But yeah, I guess we'll talk about how Ukraine resilience has been built up over the years, though, because of that.
Yeah, and that's kind of an interesting point of this. We heard a lot of attacks. The first one was successful, but we haven't heard as much since. What kind of accounts for that, and what's happened, during the war timeline?
Yeah, sure. So in like the 2002, 2022 timeline of Ukraine, of Russia attacking, or documented attacks towards Ukraine. Like early February, it was like the Herman wiper, right? There's been wipers, the Isaac wiper, and those are operational changes from the ransomware that we've seen that we're used to. They're just trying to cause operational destruction. They don't care about getting money back or giving your data back. They just want to cause operational damage and stop the whatever systems they're attacking in their tracks. Hospitals, electrical grids, all kinds of things. So the wipers just trying to do as much destruction, and most of those wipers occurred during February and April. The grave severe damage happened during that time. We also seen espionage on the rise as well. Espionage operations. We've seen the typical C2 Cobalt strikes. We've seen targeted spear phishing attacks, trying to get information and gather resources on the adversary. But the biggest attacks have been from February to April. But we're also seeing the typical attack vectors or attack surface of exposed services, VPN vulnerabilities to get into whatever network or system they're trying to target it as well.
Yeah, some of the biggest worries, at least from my side, from the research side, is that before, when we did tabletop exercises for our customers, one of the things that we covered was like, hey, you're getting hit by ransomware. One of those avenues was always, you can pay and you can recover your systems if you've not been prepped, or if something that you believe is enough value for you that you not restore and you want to pay to restore those files. Now with normalizing this type of attack, of a wiper attack, that means that there are going to be other actors that are going to mimic this same behavior. That means that you need to prep better your infrastructure. Now you need better analytics. Now you need to tune better your EDRs, because now the attack is not, oh, I'm going to steal a bunch of data, blackmail you with that data, or I'm going to encrypt a bunch of systems, not everything, some of them, and then I'm going to have you pay for it. It is, no, I'm just going to wipe everything across the board in your infrastructure and bring your operation down. That is a new scenario that is being legitimized by these actions. And in addition to this, we're seeing something that we've been telling customers again and again. Spear phishing is one of the main methods that they're getting in. There's still a lot, when we look at all of the threat intel on many of those spear phishing attacks, they're creating new processes using PowerShell, dropping files, stuff that should be caught with very good analytics, which is something that the Ukrainians have been doing a very good job at, is detecting that and being able to block that. So they were very proactive. In addition to that, VPN devices, something that we started seeing back in 2020, 2021, as the pandemic was starting, and we start seeing a bunch of the ransomware attacks targeting hospitals. The way that they were going after remote desktop, VPN appliances not being patched. We, in the case of Ukraine, we also saw a couple of 0 days, specifically around Windows client machines and macros being leveraged heavily against those target boxes.
And I haven't been on the IR team for 6 months, but I believe Steven might chime in on this. But exposed services and attachments or links in emails are still the #1 way of people getting in, or adversaries getting in. Is that correct?
Yeah, for sure. Kind of
Never gonna
ransomware.
change.
Yeah, ransomware via phishing is a never-ending struggle, and exposed services, especially with some of the bigger ones that have come out, like Log4j, things like that, that people don't know are exposed. And it kind of takes us into this one, is deciding how vulnerable you're going to be. Ukraine, as we've shown on the previous slides, has been a target of Russian operations for years now. So they've, as it's progressed, they've kind of tightened their security more and more. So, imagine always constantly getting pen tests provided for free. You're unfortunately having your defenses tested constantly and constantly. So they've evolved a lot faster than even some companies that do get pen tests, or even other nation states, just because they are essentially on a heightened defense at all the time. So they had a chance to kind of choose how vulnerable they were. Going back to the power grid, the Russians didn't get in a traditional sense. They had to actually build up a duplicate substation, test all of their their malware, their wipers, their changers, and actually find a way to get it in. It wasn't as easy as sending a phishing email or something like that. So Ukraine has done a very good job of kind of bolstering defenses and kind of choosing what needs to be exposed, to kind of handle business, and kind of closing off everything else that has deemed this isn't a risk that we're willing to take.
Yeah, and Steve, given your job, you tend to see our customers when they're the most vulnerable, because you get called in. It's kind of like that firefighter going to fight that large fire that is going inside of their infrastructure. We at least from the research side, on IR, except for a handful of customers, when we do red team engagements that have gone first through Leo's team doing the tabletop exercises, and with Ben and with Andrew Schwartz from the company, they've gone and done that purple team engagement, tabletop exercise, and hardened. They're actually pulling out those logs from the workstations. How important, or how would have changed the way that you have dealt with engagement now that we see that they're doing spear phishing, they're going after your computers, they're going after users? What difference would have made for your engagements that customers would actually had logs for the desktops?
Yeah, it's, we had joked about it, kind of when we were writing this, that, unfortunately, when companies are calling us for incident response and we're dealing with that, they always want to know, what an attacker did, how they got in, things like that. And, unfortunately, we're mostly limited by the available logging. Either the systems, they're not doing a centralized logging, or the systems themselves have had logs wiped, or they weren't centralized, or the initial compromise happened so far back that logs have rolled off. So, unless you have the ability to, do some centralized logging or some log retention, those questions are super hard to answer, and even in some cases impossible to answer. You can do the best you can up to a given date and say, I can't see anything past this, I'm sorry. So, it's important to again, kind of do that risk assessment and understand, what risks do you have exposing which services, and, how do you do the best you can to protect those services going forward?
So what we're saying here, though, is if you are able to mount a very good defense, you can fend off even the most elite attack teams or groups.
You're able to control how you control the battle space. So you dictate their tools and their tempo. How fast can they move? What tooling do they use? And this is something that many times we enter in advising our customers, because many times they come to us with this pre-notion, oh, if I deploy EDR X, I should be covered. And they don't get that EDR products have gaps in them. And those gaps, you need to cover them with analytics, which mean logs, either via telemetry from the agents themselves from your EDR product, Windows auditing, supplementing that with something like Sysmon to be able to cover that. And that you need to do all of that based on current CTI, cyber threat intelligence. Like, I'm type of company X. What are the actors acting against me? What are their TTPs? So then you start focusing not so much if they're using Cobalt Strike, not so much if they're using Mimikatz, not so much if they're using Impact. You're focusing on the behavior. stuff that is going to be very hard for an attacker to modify. If you're able to build out all of that, so you have your management supporting those actions, you have a team that is structured and is building those processes, and you have that constant loop of testing and retesting via pen test engagement, purple team engagement, red team engagements, internally or externally, and having your plan tested and constantly being updated, you can pose a very hard target to control the amount of damage or prevent, write out an attack from an attacker, even if they're an advanced attacker.
And I think it's also important to highlight for those organizations that don't have a big budget or don't have a CTI team, don't have a detection engineering team. There's also things you can do. Like I think you guys already alluded to. You can implement Sysmon. You can maybe forward your Windows event logging to a Windows event collector, to a Windows server, and just centralize them that way. Even if you can't afford a SIM, there is some cheap open source options, but maybe that's too much for one person. So just long as you're retaining those logs somewhere, like in the Windows server with the Windows event forwarding, that could be a good step for incident responders to investigate those logs. Also, one that got me always is, okay, they have network appliances, but the logs always roll over in 2 minutes because that's the default out of the box. If they can hold on to those network logs, even if it's not, say, security specific, even or even NetFlow, if they can hold on to those logs for 24 or 48 hours, that can make a whole lot of difference of keeping that organization or that business open and shutting down for 2 days, which is a lifetime for a small business, right? So the small things, there's things you can do even without a big budget, a CTI team, and we'll touch on this, and I believe in a future slide, but CTI is being incorporated in almost every, or cyber threat intelligence is being incorporated in almost every facet of security now, either indirectly or directly, just because you have to aggregate that information, and we'll talk about that here in a few slides.
So Ukraine, when they got hit, they had to respond quickly. What types of things did you see, and when other people came along to aid them, what types of things have been happening in that respect?
So one of the first things that we saw was that the government completely moved into cloud infrastructure that Microsoft offered to them. So right now they're operating inside of Azure and Office 365. They've gained the cyber threat intelligence services, and in addition to that, they've gained the help of Microsoft security teams to help keep those systems secure. So all of a sudden they have Microsoft monitoring, Microsoft providing aid and advice to all of that. And then for the first time, we see one of the largest deployments of FIDO. So what happens is that Yubico partner with with HIDES to actually provide hundreds of thousands of YubiKeys to the entire Ukrainian government for when they're connecting both on-prem into AD and also into Azure AD in the cloud. So as an attacker, once I go into that machine, many times when you talk with pen test teams, they like going after DA. They like going like, oh, I'm going to steal this account. I'm going to steal this password specifically for this person or this other person. Well, now they have a token. And now I cannot do a multi-factor exhaustion attack where I'm just going to bombard them with text messages until they click OK, or I'm going to bombard them with push notifications until they hit OK. No, it is a device that they need to have put in as part of their login process, and the machine will validate that device. So that changed completely the TTPs for attackers, because one of the things that happens, and that happens to us also, is that we focus on the common denominator. What are the most common technologies that are across all of our customers? And we focus our tool development, we focus our TTP development, and we focus everything around that. What happens where you're one of those unicorns, one of those unique that are implementing this brand new technique? That means that we have to shift quickly, which is what's happening right now to Russia. When we look at the timeline of attacks, we see that they had some credential stealing attacks. They were going after LSAS. They were going after the browser for credentials, in addition to the wiper attacks, and also just monitoring and going after PSTs. All of a sudden now, everything's in the cloud, email sits in the cloud. They try to cache as little as possible in the machine. Now it's harder for me to get to those credentials because of FIDO. Now that means that I need to shift to collecting tokens. I'm shifting to learning how DPAPI protects token X and Y. Oh, that token X and Y now has also additional protections for the cloud that it has to go through this IP for me to be able to connect. So all of a sudden you start adding layers. So now the battle space becomes more and more complex for those actors that are operating there. So yeah, Ukraine is a great example on testing many defense technologies and how to implement those and create those self-feeding loops processes to be able to maintain that level of security.
Yeah, and then with that, Carlos, I think too, FIDO and the push to use YubiKey, I think it was also driven for the fact that, to my recollection, it was the first time where kind of the cell and mobile phone environment was essentially in an untrustable state. You had deployments of rogue cell towers or things like that by armed forces and Russian army of being able to kind of intercept that. So the while SMS 2FA is something that everybody's trying to push off of and get away of, I think this kind of forced Ukraine's hands and other again security companies to kind of really focus on that FIDO integration, just because for them, gone were the days of being able to kind of trust that mobile phone provider or any of those push notifications.
Yeah, that's actually something that NIST has been saying for quite a time, that companies should move away from SMS, but it is there, it's comfortable, and now we're starting to, as you mentioned, we're starting to see the scenarios where, oh, now what was before a theory, now it's actually happening. Oh, now we have to shift.
So talking about those hacktivists mentioned earlier, is this kind of like the Revolutionary War where citizens took up arms on their own, or are they coordinating with the militaries, or what's happening in that space, and how active are they?
We're seeing both. So for example, when we start looking at some of the leaks that happened for some of the groups on the Russian side, one of the things that we started noticing was discussions among them, and also a certain level of distrust of the government itself. But they were being told like, hey, you need to do your patriotic duty. If you find data about this, put it in this chair, share it with this specific user in certain of their chat channels. One of the things that we see discussions of them going like, hey, is so-and-so part of FSB? Is so-and-so part of this other apparatus? And we see the leadership of some of these groups say, yes, just shut up, do what you need to do. For a very long time, we've seen that the Russian government has protected quite well a lot of these groups. So they not only have their patriotic duty, if we may say, but also they have a financial incentive to actually participate in that. In the case of the Ukrainians, one of the things that we see is that they started asking for help across the globe. So not only do we have IT people in Ukraine all of a sudden learning all of these techniques and performing attacks, gathering intelligence, but we also have practitioners across the globe joining that effort. So all of a sudden you go into the different sites in the dark web via Tor, and you go to those onion sites, and they actually have instructions like, hey, provide us your information, who you are, what are your capabilities, and they're receiving tasking, and they're receiving tutorials, they're receiving training on how to help Ukraine with that type of effort. So this is something that it is not new on the physical realm. So we've seen, for example, in Syria, we saw it in the battle against ISIS. We've been seeing people from the US, people from England, Denmark, and other countries go in and help the Kurds or help other countries We've seen mercenaries groups also participate. But the ideological side of support is one that has been happening for the last decade or more on the physical side of warfare. And now on the cyber side, we've seen it kind of like ramp up for the first time with this war, where we see a lot of people just going in, helping out Ukraine to perform all of these attacks, or also processing a lot of that information. People that don't know how to perform attacks, they're just there for when the other operators get the data, gets handed off to them to siphon through it, search through it, categorize it, tag it, so then it could be operationalized a lot quicker. That is something that at least I haven't seen before, and I'm seeing right now happen with this engagement.
Yeah, and I have a unique perspective. So I'm just going to talk for myself, Leo, not for TrustedSec, not for the DoD, but I had the privilege of joining PsyOps in the U.S. Army. So I have a unique perspective on watching all the misinformation campaigns. It's been going on since what? Since Roman times, right? Psychological operation, but it's finally mainstream. You know, in early 2010s, they were like, "Oh, we think we're doing it, but we don't know." In the mainstream, right? And people already knew it was going on, but now it's mainstream. There's information operations for sure going on. There's no doubt about it. I think, in my opinion, Leo's opinion. So that became mainstream, and I get to see in the sidelines now because I'm not involved directly anymore. But it's real interesting how it's become part of the game plan now. And in the previous life, to show example how this works, I might have targeted a certain population of key leaders. So there's a certain population that have key leaders. They make all the decisions for this population. It could be religious leaders, could be political leaders, could be military leaders. They're the leaders that make the decisions at the end of the day. But I knew from my research and from my targeted operations that the women, the wives, the moms held all the power in that household behind the scenes. So I will target all my efforts, all my resources to the women in that household of the key leaders. Because the key leaders, they might be the figurehead, but it was the women in the household that will make those decisions behind the scenes. And I will use all my resources to target those women and try influence operations, you know, towards my goals, towards my mission. Hypothetically, that's what I would have done, and that's what's going on now. So just this is a little insight, just speaking for myself.
Yeah, Mandy had a great report on the influence campaign that I was reading. And as I was looking at the report, we see that the Russians were focusing on 3 different areas. One of them was internal, like, hey, we need to garner support from our people and keep that support, that they're happy and they support this operation, special operation, as they call it. So they had that influence operation. They had another operation, which is specifically on demoralizing the Ukrainian people, like going like, hey, you cannot trust your leadership. They're kind of like sowing in those small seeds of distrust, providing misinformation so they cannot trust sources and stuff like that. And then we have the other operation, which is an influence operations on other countries. So they do not support, or the support for Ukraine itself winds down. And it was a very nice breakdown as I was going through the different reports at the different campaigns. Who do they target? What are the types of messages that they're sending? How do we see also, hey, they're going to perform this operation so they start prepping the area, or prepping or influencing before they start the operations themselves. Kind of like prep, as in the military, they call prepping the battle space. They've been prepping it specifically for when they go in. They already have started on that side, on the psychological side. I think finally it's structured, one might say, that kind of behavior.
So talk to us, see a little bit about the sanctions, and, you know, switching up a little bit here, how it's changed about how people are getting paid, and what's changed for both the perpetrator and the victim.
Yeah, you know, sanctions have kind of been all encompassing now through ransomware and even the conflict that's going on. So the big one is adding payees or ransomware actors to the OFAC list, or the Office of Foreign Exchange Asset Control. And what that does is it makes paying those entities or individuals or whoever it may be on those OFAC lists a lot more complicated than it used to be. Carlos touched on this earlier. Years ago, it would be you are a victim to ransomware. You're out of anything to do. Your company shut down. You can just kind of go pay and be restored to a point where you can kind of recover from. Anymore with these entities being added to OFAC lists, it's make it a lot more complicated. Going from even going to exchanges and trying to get several $1,000s in Bitcoin. They start asking questions, especially the know your customer exchanges, where you have to supply your identity. They're asking, what do you need $50,000 in Bitcoin for? Oh, well, I have to pay a ransom. And they go, yeah, you can't buy from us, because if you pay an OFAC list, an OFAC member or somebody on that OFAC list, they can come after them, and there's fines associated with that and things of that nature. And with that, in addition to the OFAC, is blockchain analysis has become something that's been really interesting to follow. Before everybody kind of said that Bitcoin and cryptocurrency was an anonymous way to pay, but it's been proving that it is not quite as anonymous as people think. They've been able to track payments through multiple wallets, through tumbling of different cryptocurrencies. It's getting more and more complex from a forensic side of the house, and just kind of following where that money's going, and kind of watching them hit that. And then especially, during the height of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, we had a lot of different ransomware groups kind of dissolving, reemerging as different groups, different names, different members. So, it kind of made a lot more kind of wallet IDs and things like that get added to OFAC lists and watch lists for payments. So, it's been definitely an interesting shift in, kind of following the OFAC and the way that they're assigning members in there and things going with that. Carlos, what do you have to add to that?
Yeah, one of the things that I found interesting was that when you read the OFAC Ransomware Advisory, one of the things that it says is, and the line that I highlighted, I have in my notes, is this also applies to companies that engage with victim ransomware attacks, such as those involved providing cyber insurance, digital forensics, and incident response, and financial services that may involve processing ransom payments, including depository institution and monetary services. Companies involved in facilitating ransomware payments on behalf of victims should also consider whether they have regulatory obligations under Financial Crime Enforcement Network, FinCEN regulations. So that means that for a very long time, a lot of insurance companies, when they were dealing with your case where you got ransomware, they would bring in a negotiator that would actually interact between them and the ransomware crew, because they had the contacts to facilitate those payments. Now they can't, because if they do that, they're in violation of laws, federal laws, and there's going to be judicial penalties that will incur there. So all of a sudden now that goes on the shoulders of the victims, on the shoulders of the insurance companies, and also depending on who do you have for retainer, it will also go against the consulting company. In our case, we have always shied away or not participated at any moment in negotiating of payments, or even telling the customer pay or not pay for a ransomware. We have always stayed outside of that because we already knew about this. We already had this as one of our practices. But there are many companies out there that have been able to operate without having those rail guards in place that now may expose not only the customer, but also themselves to kind of like judicial action against them. So it is important to know who attacked you. Many times I go with customers and they're going like, oh yeah, if we get hacked, we're going to recover day first. And we're also going to start negotiating and pay for whatever we need. And going like, wait. You haven't found root cause. You haven't found patient zero. You need to find out the TTPs of who breached your network and ransomware you. So then you can figure out who it is you're negotiating with, especially now that we have this posh mess of affiliates, like who's affiliated with what, and are they under sanctions or not, which kind of muddies the water quite a bit.
Yeah, you've kind of been building up to this, and obviously ransomware has been the biggest impact to security in many, many years. Everyone's predicted and is predicting it will get worse. What are your thoughts, and what do you think in the way that it's going, what this war has had an impact, and where it could possibly go? So
one of the things that has been debated quite a bit in Twitter and social media, has also been debated in Washington, has been also debated in other countries' governments, is at what point ransomware becomes a national security problem. And I think it already passed that threshold, and we can see it in letters from the UK through their COBRA meetings that they have been having this year. We can see it from the Australian Prime Minister, the instructions that he gave to the ASD. We can see it in communiques from the White House, where they have actually instructed Cyber Command to participate in identification and degrading the capabilities of these different groups. So now one of the things that we're seeing is that they're now being targeted by groups that have quite a large amount of budget, knowledge, and backing from very large institutions. So I think the ransomware market is now going to start changing and being more careful. Who do they target, and who and what act, because depending on who they target means if they become a target of one of these groups.
Yeah, but even when we do, like, say the U.S. government does a big or a collaborated effort with allies and U.S., do a big shutdown like Emotet, right? It was publicized, it was plastered over social media. Well, guess what? A year later, they're back. Proofpoint put out a good research on Emotet being back, because they have that visibility into the emails, and it seems like a whack-a-mole. No matter how hard we do it, they're gonna keep coming back. And then with all those new techniques and war always develops new strategies, new TTPs. They perfect their craft, and they're gonna start. The members are gonna start branching out to different groups, and they're gonna start incorporating those TTPs and bringing those techniques to spread out throughout the different groups. It seems like a never-ending fight, to be honest. And it does get a little discouraging, but that's why we have defenders. And but yeah, it's kind of tough sometimes. Like Emotet is a perfect example of that.
Yeah, and we could also see it in the Conti group chat leaks, in their Rocket chat leaks. One of the things that we noticed was that all of a sudden their infrastructure was going down, and they didn't know why. All of a sudden we see that their encryption software was no longer working as it was supposed to, that keys were being leaked. So we can see in the sidelines some of the actions that all of these groups have been having, and they're having an impact. We're still raising cost. It's going to get to a point where we can raise the cost so high that they're going to go like, you know what, we're not going to target this group, or we're not going to target this specific type of infrastructure. We're going to move to over here where we can make more money.
Yeah, and to piggyback that, from a ransomware perspective, Carlos kind of said it, is, they're in the best way possible, they're trying to say, hey, we don't want to hit these hospitals, these meatpacking, these, critical infrastructure things. If we happen to hit you, contact us and we'll give you decryption keys. Well, unfortunately, decryption keys aren't perfect. So, as much as these groups say, hey, we're not trying to target you, they pretty much also come out and say, hey, if you happen to get hit by us, it wasn't on purpose. So, they're not really kind of limiting their scope as much as they're kind of offering a get out of jail free if we accidentally, if you're accidentally in our path, we didn't mean it. So here's a free decryption key.
All right. And how has attack operations changed? It's got the 10-minute warning. So we're seeing more espionage. We're seeing complex, well, in the military we call it complex attack, where you do multiple methods on a single target. We're seeing a hybrid of cyber with kinetic traditional warfare. I haven't read or haven't saw anything that has directly related into personnel lost in the cyber attacks. I think there's been 2 documented cases like during transfers, but we haven't seen severe impact to human life from a cyber attack. But we're moving towards that way. We're training that way. It's being used more openly, and they're seeing the benefits of it. Also, we see in defensive doing defense forward. We're also seeing of wipers being used more for destructive operations.
Yeah.
So interesting, then, how is it changing your jobs? What differences are you seeing? What have you had to do to adapt? Steve, lead us off there and tell us from an incident response perspective, you're on the front lines. What are you seeing there?
From the incident response side, kind of when the height of the war started, ransomware attacks, I think, across the industry plummeted. So it kind of got real quiet there for a little bit. But unfortunately, things are kind of ramping back up. A lot of groups have re-engineered themselves, kind of rebranded. So, unfortunately, we're kind of seeing an uptick again in ransomware and, business email compromises, things like that. So, unfortunately, not too much is changing on the IR side. It's still, as of now, starting to become business as usual again.
Leo, what about you on the detection engineering and purple teams?
So for me, we're noticing that they're very agile when it comes to their TTPs, and we have to try to keep up with them. So now I saw a couple of questions about DevSecOps. Well, we have to develop the detection lifecycle now. Well, kind of like the software development lifecycle, we have to be as agile as them. They're a software shop. A lot of their groups are pretty much small software shops where they can incorporate different techniques and update their infrastructure as the code. So we're using detection as code, as well as like the Git repository as a source of truth. There's things like that we need to incorporate and be as agile as them. From the purple team side, like Carlos said, the Conti leaks, the different leaks that are being put out, we're definitely incorporating those into our scenarios, and depending on the client, depending on the request, we're using those. If they're a critical infrastructure, or if they're a business that it is targeted or could be targeted by state nation hackers or groups, we definitely incorporating those playbooks into our scenarios.
And Carlos, from the research side.
Yeah, one of the things that we're seeing quite differences that many times before, from the research side, we would go like, hey, we have all of this threat intel information. Like MITRE puts quite a lot of work on different groups, different sources, different techniques, and multiple companies put out reports out there. And many times we go to customers like, hey, let's go through this process, identify where you should focus first, what is being used most commonly. And many times customers didn't want to, or they went like, no, just give me kind of like my silver bullet. Give me my EDR, give me my AV. I know that from the research side, we do a lot of training for agencies. We do also a lot of research on multiple tools for customers that ask us for the custom type of research. And now we're seeing a shift where now they are learning like, no, I need to have multiple layers. No, tools are not silver bullets. No, now I need to also pay for training to be able to use these tools. So we're starting to see a change, even in our red team as they're doing operations. One of the things that they've been seeing is that EDRs have gotten better. Analytics have gotten better. Not so much the default install of next, and then a reboot. That's the default installation for AV and every security product. And what happens is that all of those companies go like, oh, we don't want friction. We don't want customers complaining about false positives. So we're going to set the bare minimum, the minimum viable product to them to keep them safe. But now we're having customers that have gone through a purple team exercise, that have gone through tabletop exercises, that have worked with Andrew and Ben from our company and gone through multiple iterations of having detections. And then when our red team goes in and they get their situational awareness, they go like, they have their ducks in a row. They have proper logging. Oh, we enumerated defenses and we're seeing this and this and this and this in place. So all of a sudden you see that their operational tempo runs down. Now they cannot operate as fast as they could before. Now we see them testing a bit extra in the lab, testing more stuff, reaching out to us, to the research team, like, hey guys, I'm seeing this and this and this. How can you help us kind of like show the customer possible gaps that they're probably missing as part of this exercise? And we look at the EDR product. What is the EDR product? And we modify payloads, we modify behaviors to see if they're covering those so they can mimic and emulate that type of more advanced attacker to bypass those. So now we're seeing that defense is getting better, which is good. It's a positive. I know that many times we focus on the negative a lot, but I'm happy to say that I even remember one of the guys actually mentioned that the golden age of EDRs was in 2019, where EDRs weren't that good. And now we're seeing them that they're actually getting a lot better, and customers are actually improving upon that.
So where do you see, putting on prognosticator hats, what might we expect from 2023 from this? And then just maybe in and around a lot of the general trends around cloud, MITRE zero trust, DevSecOps, and talked about a little bit, and EDRs talked about a little bit. Where do you see what we're talking about with Ukraine sort of impacting those more core trends for products or services? Carlos, you want to start that, or?
Yeah, I would say one of the trends going forward is looking and being more organized in how we do stuff. For example, when we look at our customers, many times what we see is that they go like, oh, I'm going to monitor only the servers. That's for what I have a license for Splunk or for Elk or forever. And now that they're looking at threat intel and they're basing it off about known behavior, known techniques from attackers, they're going like, oh no, I need to focus now on my perimeter devices. I need to focus now on my client devices, what's happening there, specifically process auditing. That's kind of like one of the biggest. If you go into the MITRE Attack Navigator and you go into sources of data and you go and check all of the checkboxes specifically for process logging, you see that a bunch of techniques, a great deal of techniques all of a sudden are covered right there. So that's one of the ones that we're seeing. So I would say is that shift in covering your desktop applications, covering your perimeter, and also a focus on data exfiltration. That is one of the areas that when we were prepping the slides, we were looking at and discussing. And sadly, a lot of our customers are not implementing proper mitigations there on detecting data exfiltration.
Leo, how about you?
Yeah, I definitely see, to touch on my previous point, is detection engineering and purple teams being more agile, being more flexible, and using that software development lifecycle framework and incorporating it into their own workflow. Like I said, the using Git repository as a source of truth, doing unit testing with GitHub Actions or GitLab CDCI, using those type of automated actions to do unit testing and syntax checking. That way you can focus more time on actually building the detections and doing research. Also see cyber threat intelligence being incorporated into different teams that usually weren't. Like previously IR will kind of, when I was an IR in the military, we'll do, I guess, not call sourcing cyber threat intelligence, and we had some teams that did it, but we also have like Word documents in our desktop of different research that we're looking up for different techniques. But now we have to have a kind of a process of correlating or aggregating those different threat reports, right? And extracting the IOCs and doing research on our own, not just focusing or relying on external threat intelligence or threat intelligence feeds, but actually testing out those techniques that we're seeing from like the DFIR report, looking at them for threat intelligence, looking at different Mandiant, all the different Mandiant, Red Canary, TrustedSec, all the different blog posts that are being put out by all these great groups, and aggregating those different indicators and testing those in our lab and trying to develop a published report for our own internal teams and using, fundamentals of cyber threat intelligence and trying to map it back to MITRE. MITRE's being big. That's been on trends since 2020 now. So we're definitely seeing cyber threat intelligence being incorporated directly or indirectly into different teams of facet security, just out of necessity, just to try to keep up with the different trends, and trying to put that back into, say, IR or to detection engineering research, and those types of deals, for sure.
And Steve, how about you?
Yeah, speaking, kind of strictly from the IR side of the house, it's we're never quite sure what to expect going forward. We're hoping that, again, a lot of these companies are kind of starting to, as Ukraine did, identify these, low-hanging exposed services and, kind of increase defenses there. Start pushing towards multi-factor authentication. But, we've seen a lot more shift to cloud-based stuff. And, with that, some of those cloud providers are now dictating your security. Microsoft has just now pushed out globally disabling legacy protocols and, Office 365, small changes like that attackers were using to get into environments are, going away. So this, is going to potentially cause a shift in how, attackers are getting in, the attacks that they're using, and, how they end up deploying, ransomware throughout the environment. So, kind of with that, it's just, kind of understanding what the new attacks are going to be, and, hopefully learning what attackers are doing to spread malware and things like that.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much. I know we've asked quite a few questions, and thanks, Carlos, since we're running a little bit over, to answer those. And I think you guys hit on most everything that came up too along the way. So just wanted to take time to thank everyone for joining us. Really, really appreciate it, and really appreciate the three of you taking time out of your day to share your experiences with us. Thanks so much, and make sure you catch us the next time. In January, we'll be having the webinar on 2022 conference recap, as well as the 2023 trends. So look forward to seeing you then. Thanks so much, everybody.
Awesome.
Thanks for having us.
Take care, guys.